Will be a very sad Mother's Day for a family in Hampton.
They're remembering a young woman as an amazing sister and an even more amazing mother. Dozens of friends and family members gathered tonight at Darling Stadium to remember Tiara Jefferson. The 20-year-old pregnant woman was shot and killed while driving her car in Newport News yesterday. They released white balloons and took turns telling stories about the slain mother.
Tiara was 15 weeks pregnant. Her 20-month-old baby girl was also inside the car at the time of the shooting. The little girl was not hurt and was at tonight's vigil, a painful reminder of the ones left behind.
She just wanted to take care of her daughter, and the fact that somebody out there took my sister's life, it hurts. My family is hurt. My niece is hurt. My niece don't have her father or her mother. It's just crazy. Like, how somebody can just take innocent people's lives. It's just sad.
There have been no arrests. A man who was in the car with Tiara was also shot but is recovering.
And we learned tonight that the father of Tiara's 21-month-old baby also died from gun violence. Family members say he was shot and killed about 2 years ago before the toddler was born.